Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Decloak podcast. My very special guest today is Jothy Rosenberg. Jothy, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, well, thank you for reaching out. And we were obviously acquainted through Forbes and everything else. And for our audience, Jothy, please introduce yourself. Let the world know who you are. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Jothy Rosenberg, and yeah, I'm in the cybersecurity industry, and I'm a many-time startup founder. But I think it might be helpful just to explain where I'm coming from is to just briefly describe um, uh, where my grit comes from. Okay, we all know that startup people have to have grit to do what they're doing, and you might say that it's probably true of people in the cybersecurity industry too. I'm not sure, but it's certainly true that I developed a lot of grit, not of my own choosing actually, but when I was 16, I was actually I discovered that there was a problem because I was uh, jumping rope in a gym class in high school, and in midair, my right knee wouldn't straighten out. It was locked in a bent position, so of course, crashed to the ground and in a lot of pain. And it took a little while to figure it out, but it turns out it was a rare kind of bone cancer. And once they knew that, it was an emergency and they amputated the next day. No time to think about it, no time to prepare. And it was, as you can imagine, very hard to, especially for a 16-year-old uh, to deal with that. And what made it worse was that everybody was around me was saying, well, what do you like to do? And I would say, well, I like to play baseball. I like to play hockey. I like to play football. Oh, well, you can't do those things. I like to ski. No, you can't ski. So it was pretty intense how negative people were around me. Now, this was a long time ago. Okay, this was 1973. So um, a lot of things that they were saying they thought were true and are not true anymore. But you still probably don't want to do that. Um, and the way I figured out how to counteract all that was to uh, figure out sports I could do and really work hard and do them well until I was good at them. And skiing was one of them, and I got to be a double black diamond skier, um, and then another one was swimming, and I became a competitive open water swimmer, and I do the Alcatraz swim from 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 Alcatraz Island back to San Francisco every year, and I've ridden my bike one legged from Boston to New York City, which is a 4-day ride, four times. And and then just one more thing on that. 3 years later, the cancer had spread to my lung, and I had to have a lung removed, which was a real setback. And unfortunately, the doctor, who had no experience with chemotherapy, which had just come out, told me that I had zero chance of survival. So, it kind of adds to the psychic load I was dealing with. And it turns out that chemotherapy actually did work. And that's why 52 years later, I'm still here. Anyway, I went on to, sort of the other parts of my life other than sports. And I finished college. I got a PhD in computer science. I stayed on the faculty of that institution, which was Duke University, in their computer science department on the faculty for 5 years. And then I was working on a project that was fascinating, and I got the itch, and I went to go try to turn that into a startup company. And that first one was a supercomputer company that I did in Sunnyvale. I moved the family to California because North Carolina was not yet a place you could even consider doing a startup. And so I started that, and then I did a couple of other things, And along the way, I moved to Boston after a couple of companies out there. And I've done 7 more startups in the Boston area. And several of them have been cybersecurity. And so I've spent a fair amount of time in the cybersecurity side of things. And in fact, the current one, my 9th one, is a cybersecurity company. And I'll be happy to talk about that when we kind of spend a little bit more time talking about cybersecurity. But I just want to say a couple other things. I did because I figured out the hard way, if you will, that doing sports when you're somebody who's disabled is a great way to rebuild self-esteem. And I decided that I wanted to help, other people do that. So I wrote a book called Who Says I Can't? That became my mantra. It's not a question, it's a statement. You say it with an exclamation point. Um, and I started, then I started a foundation that it's a nonprofit. It raises money, and what we spend the money on is adaptive equipment for kids that want to get into a sport. And it's called whosaysican't.org. And the equipment we have to get for people is expensive. Like a running leg costs about $21,000.
Wow.
And if you get it for a kid and the kid grows, you got to stay with the kid because you don't want to take something away from them when they've just figured out, oh my God, I can run again, or I can run for the first time. So, and it is transformative. But insurance, at least I don't know about insurance in Scotland, but insurance in the United States, in general, won't pay for sports equipment, and so they're on their own. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. It's almost as if people's mental health is not important, but just their physical health is, which is incredibly short-sighted. So I did that, and I've also written 6 books. My most recent one is called Tech Startup Toolkit. It's right there, sitting on the counter, and then I've started a podcast, which is sort of goes with that is aimed at startup founders, and it's called Designing Successful Startups.
An amazing introduction, Jothy. And again, you've turned a tragedy and also circumstances into so much positivity. You've probably had an impact in so many different people's lives. You've created companies, you've written books, you're spreading a message of, that I guess, when you're faced with such situations in your life that, there is a way through it. And I guess, going like from the 70s, when there's lots of people telling you can't do something, or that's basically the end of things, and you've kind of turned that round and, said an F you to a few people to then say, I ain't taking that, I ain't accepting it. And that to me is an amazing set of values. And again, I can't even begin to think of, was that what happened to you? Was that the catalyst to then double down in so many different interests to help people? Like going into startups and going into cyber, is that a result of, the situations that happened to you, that you felt like you have? Because in cyber, we are helping people. We're helping a multitude of different things. We're helping to try and stop the bad guys. We're trying to stop cataclysmic events happening against like critical infrastructure, whatever your industry or vertical may be. I'm kind of curious because, for me and our audience, this is the first time I've met Jothy. So hearing this is obviously quite profound, and also at the same point, very, very inspiring to hear. So I know I've just kind of unloaded on you there, Jothy, but, talk me through, like, was there any kind of specific pivots to why you went down cyber route and startups? Yeah.
So the first foray into cyber was actually a company that a good friend of mine and I founded called GeoTrust. And originally, what we were trying to do was to make business to business online communications trusted and secure. But we were probably, and this is very common for startup founders, we were a decade ahead of where the technology was, because we started it in '99, and the web wasn't ready for that. There really wasn't a thing there. So and back then, by the way, we didn't call it pivoting. We called it bobbing and weaving, which is kind of more accurate description of how it felt.
Yeah.
And we did a couple of those, and we finally settled on something that is incredibly simple, but it ended up being useful and powerful, which was it was two things actually. One was before people had learned to either always type HTTPS into their browser, or even before that became commonplace, getting people to look for the lock symbol in the browser. But you could still get fooled. People were already doing nasty things, like they would spell Microsoft where instead of an I, it was a one. So Microsoft.com wasn't really, you thought that's where you were, and you weren't. And they would scrape all the stuff off the Microsoft site, and they would reproduce it, and you would think you were at Microsoft, and then they would try to steal something from you. And we created this third party validation that was essentially a symbol, a logo on the web that was our logo, GeoTrust, and you could click on it. It would say verified. That who you're visiting is verified by the independent third party. So that was cool. The other thing we did was since we were so focused on SSL communications, which is obviously where the S in HTTPS comes from. We looked at how these SSL certificates were getting created, and VeriSign had kind of a lock on the market, and they took 4 days to issue, to validate you as a company and issue you a certificate, because it was 100% manual process. And it also they were expensive. And we said, this is ridiculous, because there's enough independent databases to validate a company. And so we said, screw it. We're going to do an end around around these guys. And we created a 10-minute process that generated, the SSL certificates for you. And it worked great, and nobody ever had an issue with it. It's funny, because instead of VeriSign fixing their process, they waited until we had taken away 25% of their market share. We started at 0, and by the time they bought us, we had taken away 25, and we gained a point a month. So it taken us like a little over 2 years to pull that much market share from them. And then they bought us for 5 times revenues, which was great. I mean, and that was the first foray into cybersecurity. But in both cases, yes, it was about helping people. At the time, I have to say, it did not feel like I was being altruistic. It felt like, hey, this is a problem that should be fixed, and we know how to fix it. It was much more, pure business oriented, but within the confines of cybersecurity. Yes.
Amazing. And then, like, kind of circling back to like the challenges you've been faced with. You've obviously mentioned a few on the personal level, but within the industry, talk me through some of the challenges you've been faced with. I'm assuming it was a bit of a nightmare with some of your startup companies as well. Again, it's entirely up to you if you want to touch upon that. Yeah.
I'd love to, because for anybody that's done a startup or thinking about doing a startup, one of the personal challenges a person feels, especially if they're being pushed into the position or themselves just want to be in the position of being the leader, the CEO. And that is this phenomenon, of course, that, and I'm sure everybody has heard about, called imposter syndrome. And because I came out of a technical background, computer science, and then stayed in academia for 5 more years, which sort of reinforced the pure technical nature of my starting out of my career. When I was with my sort of a group of us had decided we were going to start a company. So I'm kind of going back before GeoTrust to one that we started in. The 5 of us started in about 97. And you probably all recall that the web really came into being in 95, with the release of Windows 95 and getting TCP/IP on everybody's desk, and suddenly it took off. Netscape had the browser. Microsoft was playing catch up, but you had a good browser out there, and so people were starting to play with the web. And of course, sites would put up a single web server. Almost everybody had a single web server. But if your site suddenly got popular, like which happened during a Super Bowl to Victoria's Secret, and suddenly 1 million people, I don't know the exact number, but I'm sure it was 1 million people, went to their website because their ad during the Super Bowl said to, and they crashed instantly. Anyway, we had the first load balancing solution for the web, and it worked really well. And but before the company was funded, the group said, Jothy, you're the elder statesman of the group. I mean, yeah, right. I was like 36. and they said, so you're the CEO. I said, oh my God, no, I'm not. I don't feel like I have nearly enough sales and marketing. And they said, well, you're it. And I go to the first investor, and he says, what gives you any idea in the world that you're prepared to be CEO? And of course, he just tickled my imposter syndrome, and I didn't want to proceed. The other investor, who ultimately became the lead investor, said, no, he's wrong. The person who has the passion and the vision and can articulate why the problem is so severe and that your solution solves it, they should be the initial startup CEO. And maybe after 18 months, there's a succession plan. But the imposter syndrome is not really relevant if you are the person who actually gets what it is you're doing, because otherwise somebody else is going to have to come with you when you're talking to investors, when you're talking to, if there's somebody else who's sort of quote more qualified to be CEO, but they don't have the same, I helped come up with this, I've been on this since the beginning. If they're not that person, then that's a mismatch. And that's one of the big mistakes I made, because I said, no, I'm not going to be the CEO. And I was one of the founders, and I was involved, but more from the sidelines, not on a day-to-day basis.
And do you see much difference from, you know, your first incarnations of startups to now? Is it still like the same formula that you approach in terms of like development, looking at problems? You know, I'm thinking if anyone's watching this and they're thinking about starting a company in cyber or looking to design a new product or whatever it may be, you know, do you see much of a difference from, you know, through the, I think it's 8 or 9 companies that you've made or helped found, sorry. Yeah.
I would say that there's some things that haven't, there's some parts of the formula that have not changed, um, that have probably been true for, forever,
Yeah.
a company can only exist if they are solving an extremely big problem in a big market, at least on a relative scale, big market, and their solution is maybe not the best, but it's really good, and and people agree it solves the problem, and they're willing to pay for it. But then, the tools that people use to develop have changed drastically. And the speed with which you can get things working, the whole concept of SaaS. And now, of course, AI is accelerating things as well. So, all of those things. And, startups are able to leverage a lot of tools for marketing, for sales, automation. So you can get a company going faster. You can get a company to be fairly efficient with everything from what they need in finance to what they need in manufacturing. All of that has there's many more people doing it. So yeah, but if you step back and you say, well, from the 50,000 foot level, nothing's changed.
Yeah.
You can't cut corners. One of the things I say in my book and on frequently on my podcast is no startup has ever succeeded that didn't prove product market fit.
Mm-hmm.
And product market fit, fundamentally, starting point has to be a great market. And a lot of people make the mistake of doing this, if we build it, they will come. It's still true. And I did it too. I wrote this book because I made so many mistakes, and I figured maybe I could help people not make the same mistakes. But I made one of the, the biggest no-nos, which was one of my companies was, this stuff is so cool. This must be good to solve some problem.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And it's sage advice, and obviously for our audience, we'll plug the books and everything else in the podcast, and hopefully people can use those lessons to help better them. And I think there's not enough mentoring. But ironically, you would think with this day and age, with YouTube and Spotify, there would be lots and lots of content, but it seems like it's quick fix content rather than like, hey, you've had to slog it out for 2 years. You've had to do market analysis. You have to survey 100 different people and then iterate and stuff. So yeah, very much. And I'll probably add it to my reading list for my next transatlantic travel. And then, yeah, obviously 5-star reviews that come with it as well. But yeah, moving into like the your topic, Jothy, that you want to discuss that needs relevance and clearing up within the industry.
So there's definitely a big thing, I think, which is, so the first is sort of clearing up in the industry, and then we can go into some sort of offshoots of that in a minute. But I do write about, and I wrote for Forbes actually on this topic, the dirty little secret, I think, in the industry, which is that. So all the processors that are used in everything, whether it's servers in a data center or your laptop, your phone, or even the tiny little processors in the washers and dryers that we use. All of those processors are still using the von Neumann architecture that John von Neumann proposed in 1945, and that's it. And what it is basically a fairly simple architecture that allowed Moore's law to take place.
Yeah.
So I none of us can regret that it was simple and Moore's law happened, and we wouldn't be where we are without that pace of innovation. But there is a price that we've paid. And the processor, the basic thing I'm talking about in the processor is that you have a program counter and it is pointing to a location in memory where it is going to get its next instruction. And it doesn't check. It doesn't have a way to check. It doesn't know if the difference between a good instruction or a bad instruction. And so that's the simple model that we have. Now, you add to that the fact that when people who've for the last 40 years have been checking on how many bugs are there in deployed software, and it's been consistent for all that time, and it's between 15 and 50, so between 15 and 50 bugs per 1,000 lines of source code. And to benchmark that, you probably once in a while you probably see a Ford F-150 pickup truck, even over in Scotland, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's just gazillions of them on the roads here because people think that they should drive that around instead of a sedan. I don't know. They're not carrying a load everywhere they go, but whatever. So Ford F-150 has 150 million lines of code in it if you buy a current model. And so you multiply, the 15. Let's give them credit for, let's say they're on the small end, 15 bugs per 1,000 lines of source code. And someone I got to know a little bit who is in the FBI said that their analysis has shown that on average 2% of those bugs are exploitable from the outside world. So if you can get in, then you're going to be able to find 2% of 15 bugs per 1,000 lines of code, which is a lot of bugs in a car like that. So you combine those two, and it's pretty scary because especially the serious attackers, think nation state kinds of things, or just other sophisticated attackers. Their goal is to exploit existing bugs or social engineering. Those are really the two most common ways in. And I don't have anything to tell you about with respect to social engineering. I mean, it's a whole different topic of mostly training people. But there is something that can be done if you've got this, sort of combination of simple von Neumann type processor, which is all of them, and buggy software, which is all of it. Okay, I mean, even defense, departments of the world written code still, if they spend like a year longer than the rest of us testing, they might get it down a little bit lower than that, but not much. It's not zero. I mean, I talked to the admiral of the fleet of nuclear submarines in the United States that are loaded with missiles, nuclear missiles. And I said, is all of your software perfect? He said, no. We know it's not. That was a scary moment for me.
Yeah.
So what? And then the dirty little secret continues on though, because after Stuxnet happened, which was it happened in early 2010. By late 2010, DARPA, the Defense Department, U.S. Defense Department's research arm, had put together a program which they funded at the level of 100 million to address this problem because they were scared to death of what Stuxnet was going to teach the world. And so that's where, I went right for that because I had taken a break from doing startups because of the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, and I hadn't kind of gotten back to doing that. And then this happened, and I took it as a personal affront. I'd worked all my, since college, I'd worked all those years of 5 years of getting a PhD, and then 5 more years as a professor, trying to do things that were good with software. And here's a bunch of people that were trying to do bad with it. And I felt like I needed to go get involved and try to counteract that. And so we had to work really hard at it. And one of the things we discovered was we weren't going to make any progress because of this combination of weak processor and buggy software. If we just wrote more software that was going to be our cyber defense systems, well, we weren't different from everybody else. We don't know how to write perfect software either. So that's just creating a larger attack surface. And so what we felt like we had to do was to build this cybersecurity into the hardware. And that set me up for a very difficult life because, yes, that's true. And we could demonstrate it and we could absolutely prove that we could stop all buffer overflow attacks and we could stop all code injection and stop all stack smashing. And that's right there. Those three things just cover a huge amount. I mean, even though the beginning of Stuxnet wasn't a buffer overflow, it did use one later and wouldn't have been able to succeed without it. So, you still have a defense in depth kind of way to stop these things. But you try to ask. So jumping forward, I decided, oh my God, this is incredible what we found in our 5 years of research. So now it was 2015. And I felt like this has got to be turned into a commercial company. So I went down that route, and I'm still on that route. I've been doing it ever since then, and it works. It's great. It's something that we had to sell as hardware intellectual property that companies essentially license from us. And then they have to build it into their chip, semiconductor company, build it into their chip. And then they have to sell that to somebody whose device it goes into, and that will then protect that device. But that process takes about 2 years. Yeah. And you ask a startup company, which my company was trying to survive for 2 years with we weren't going to get significant revenue until we got the per chip royalty. Yeah. And, these were high volume chips. So those numbers were going to be nice. But, company struggled, had to raise multiple rounds of early stage financing. Then the pandemic hit. That hit us hard. It's just been a very, very hard road.
It's almost like in I work in the biotech industry, and it's the same. We put things into live motion production, then the return on that could be a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And it's almost like you're hedging your bets on that return. And some people probably may not want to invest in that because they can't envision that return until later on. And, are you in a good place now? Have you overcome those challenges? And, what's the kind of outlook at the moment?
Well, not exactly. So what I had hoped would happen is after, many, many setbacks is that I would be able to sell it and do pretty well for the shareholders. But we got to the point where it was taking too long for everything to find a buyer as well. And so at this point, I'm probably, down to selling the patents to someone who can make use of them and kind of put the adequate resources into and they would hopefully not just get the patents, but they would get the technology, which is completely working, and then they could, go from there to put it in their product. But I have basically until the end of March, the end of Q1, to find a buyer.
Okay. And I guess like any organization or business that's trying to get over the line with multiple different things, timing is everything. And if you're having a knock-on effect from pandemic, then it's almost like sometimes technology is or what you've created is slightly ahead of maybe the market understanding. Like this to me is like a no-brainer. I'd imagine big chip makers would be looking at this, but again, they then have another part of that supply chain that needs to be attached to then make revenue, and then it kind of kicks back. But it's I don't envy the position that many startups are in at the moment, because there was lots of funding last year for multiple different tech companies. This year it looks a bit shaky, and so I really hope that
it's definitely timing, and I've had some very good luck with timing. The one about the load balancing.
Yeah.
We were doing 2 million in revenue and sold it for 106 million. So
wow.
So that, that's good timing, or that's incredibly lucky timing.
Yeah.
Because you don't get 53 times revenues. That isn't a thing. That isn't a thing. Nobody talks about that. But look, the statistic that we've all heard, that 8 out of 10 startups fail, is turning out to be true for my 9. Now, I'm not going to do a 10th one, but out of my 9, I had 2 that had decent exits. And this one, probably not. So that's going to be, 2 out of 9.
Yeah. which is amazing. And at least you're trying. At least you're trying to innovate. You're obviously getting groups of people together to then fix problems and clarify items within the industry, because many people just give up the first opportunity, and again, your kind of luck is running out. So you're right. It's like spend time with the grandkids.
Yeah, exactly. Well, then there was one other question you asked me that I hope there's still time for, which is, what is something that is BS in the cyber industry and needs to change?
Yeah. My favorite question. I love to ask everyone. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make it broad. So the computer industry is doing something again that it's done before, and every time it does it, it's dumb, it's wrong. And that is that everyone goes after the shiny new thing, like a bunch of 5-year-olds playing soccer, and they all are just going after the ball, and the whole field's all wide open, and what are you doing down there? Well, that new thing is AI. And I use AI. I'm not dissing it. But here's the thing. AI is actually an extremely juicy target for attackers because they get so much leverage from it. If they can fool your model, so they fool the machine learning process and they manipulate the model to their benefit or to hurt you, that's one thing they could do. They could steal the model and out of somebody's device, and they could then change it themselves and reuse it. Or you go back to the AI, the real AI component, which is the inference engine, and they trick it with some phony data. Well, these things are all, instead of affecting, when you attack a computer, you're affecting that one computer. Sure, you can try to get that same attack to attack multiple computers, but you could just attack one inference engine, and it may be controlling a whole bunch of devices. So it's very attractive, right? So all the chip companies that I know of, excuse me, are building AI parts now. And I know for a fact, because I've talked to them, that they're all feeling this enormous pressure to get these to market. And they're saying, well, we don't have time to get cyber protections in now. We'll put them in later. And they've done that before. And it's one of the reasons why the whole IoT space is so buggy, because they said, oh, well, either they said it doesn't matter, or they'll put security in later.
And it's back to your point you made earlier, Jothy, about the GTM strategies. It's like the past is repeating itself. Get to market, who cares, cut corners. And before we know it, we're like data poisoning, hallucination. AI's connected to all of your systems. You compromise one instance or one machine, and you've taken over everything. And it's also like the manipulation of IP. That everything's tied together in this AI mesh, and people aren't really looking at fixing the here and now. Everybody's pushing towards a futuristic view. And I think that's crazy and ties back into your point earlier about the cutting corners. And then we're going to have another IoT industry on our hands and another nightmare. And maybe startup number 10 coming your way. I don't know, Jothy, but yeah.
Well, as long as you're the CEO.
Oh, I don't know about that. So please continue your train of thought. Thanks.
Oh, actually, that was really I did make my point. That's it. Yeah.
Love it.
I think we need to do better, but I don't think anybody's listening.
I know that they're chasing the gold at the end of the rainbow, not realizing that it's perpetuating other issues that people are maybe too blindsided at the moment. I'll be like it was with we've spoken about hundreds of millions of lines of code. It's not until retrospectively people look back and go, there's 100 billion Java vulnerabilities. And it's that's because nobody's scrutinizing code, and it's the same with AI, no one's scrutinizing it. And I think we're going to see one or two of the big players in the next year or two really get caught out with it. I won't name them, but you probably hazard a guess. Anyway, Jothy, thank you so much for your time. Obviously, we'll plug a multitude of different resources, including your podcast, books, charity that you're involved in as well. And again, thank you so much for sharing your personal stories. And again, probably one of our most interesting guests we've had. And I'm just I kind of went on complete different tangents, but I need to keep myself disciplined. So, any final thoughts, Jothy, before we wrap up?
If there is one other resource that you could point people to, which is, so I did a TED talk on why my theory that I've developed over a long period of time, why people with disabilities tend to overachieve. If you think about sort of the previous generation. There were a lot of polio survivors, and they were just amazing people, from Franklin Roosevelt to Alan Alda to Jack Nicklaus to Joni Mitchell. I mean, just these people were just, superstars. And so I encourage people who are interested in that, as to why that might be, to the TED Talk, which I'll give you the link for. And the question I ask people who listen to me give that talk, I've done that other places, is, so I believe that the theory I lay out is something that disabled people gravitate towards naturally. But there's nothing about it that requires you're disabled to sort of take these steps. So everybody could do it, but most people don't, and it's just, and it's the people who've been sort of pushed down a little bit by their own, whatever happened to them, and then feeling a need to fight back, that sort of starts the ball rolling, and then it really rolls, and they keep at it, and they keep at it more than their able-bodied counterparts.
Yeah, absolutely love it. And I love the positivity from you as well, Jothy. And I think where people are faced with such circumstances, that we shouldn't, as people, need to be in a situation like that to achieve more in life. But people make the most of a situation, and then they become inspirational, and then it's like this cascade. It's incredible. Yeah.
Well, we all know, I think, that humans thrive on a certain amount of adversity.
Yeah.
You can't find an adult human who hasn't had some adversity. It's just not possible. Maybe Donald Trump. I don't know, but that explains everything, right?
I'm saying nothing about politics. We did a live stream at New Year, and it could have got quite heavy. It went from discussing Skynet right through to US politics and AI and God knows wherever else the world's going to go, and everything from UAPs to like the madness of like world leaders and war and horrible things that we don't need in this planet, which keeps us down. And yeah, like you say earlier, we just want to prosper and do good things in the world. But again, our masters have different plans for us, I guess. But anyway, Jothy, yeah.
Yeah. Luckily, he hasn't set his sights on Scotland. He wants Greenland and Panama, and now he's saying he wants Canada to become a state. So, I mean, kind of weird.
Yeah. I mean, it's always about resources, and the Donald, as we'll call him, the Donald will swoop into Scotland and get more golf courses, and as long as he doesn't touch my whiskey, that we won't have a war. The People's Republic of Scotland will rebel. But yes, it's absolutely crazy what's going on in the world. And by the time this episode drops, I really hope that things are easier in the world for people. But anything can happen. I'm just bamboozled by everything in the world. But again, as long as we have individuals like yourself, Jothy, that are trying to inspire, you're building amazing things, and the load balancer stuff is like blowing my mind. It's like just incredible. Like I'm going to talk about this at work, but by the way, so this has been amazing. Apart from obviously all the tragic stuff that's happened, but you've managed to turn it into amazing things. And I really hope people are inspired by this episode, and also when they check out your TED Talk, your podcast, and the books. I feel like I'm underachieving in life, Jothy. So you're giving me imposter syndrome. So yeah.
Oh, I hate that. But I in terms of giving back to, in this case, to startup founders, my goal for this year, in addition to keeping the podcast going, is to create an online course, because some people aren't going to learn best by picking up the book and reading
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, they can learn a lot from, podcast, but this is going to be uh, very disciplined kind of set of videos and lessons, uh, you know, basically the same general topics as in the book, but with more embellishment, more stories.
Yeah.
I believe people learn really well from stories. So I try to tell stories in the book, true stories about what happened to me. And that's why I had to wait until I'd done, 9 startups to have enough stories. But, and I'll try to, add more and more of a sort of personal touch, because
Yeah.
I'll be speaking it. So that'll be something that'll be coming out from me later this year. I'm going to keep the same name as the podcast, Designing
Cool.
Successful Startups. Yeah.
Nice. And I'm like, I can't stop smiling because I'm going to probably be one of their first subscribers, and I'm just going to be like sharing the hell out of this and be like, people, because that's what we need. We need authentic stories. We need people, because it's relatable. It's easier. My learning preference is visual. So yeah, I think there's going to be so many people that will love this, and also listen to the stories from all these different companies and all the things that tripped you up that people can learn from, and also all the things that people don't really think about when it comes to a startup, like everything from hiring, tax, how you raise money, product fit. God, you could have multiple series. Yeah.
It's amazing how many things you don't think about. Here's one. So how many founders should your company have? Well, that's not an easy question to answer. Okay, sure. 2 of you came together and you worked on this in your garage for a long period of time. And then you had a company and you started inviting people in. But what if you're like 4 guys that started, and then you added a 5th, and then you added a 6th, and where do you cut off the number, right?
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, what if one of your, let's say you've got a group of 3 or 4 founders, and one of them, like, I don't know, has a mental break and just tries to take the company down with them. I've had that happen 3 times. It's not a rare event.
Again, incredible content, Jothy, and people are going to love these stories, because you see these startups, like EO is a good YouTube channel, but they don't give the rawness, and that's what I think people need, especially younger founders coming up. People probably thinking, am I going to make the right direction and things, and then you're saying you had 3 people have just implode. It reminds me of the TV show Halt and Catch Fire. I don't know if you ever watched that. There's an element in it. Yeah, it's really good. There's a former IBM guy, and he decides that they have a product ready to rival IBM with a PC. So it's Texas Instruments, and he decides to just burn everything that they've created, all the stock, and he's just like, I don't care anymore. And it's like, oh, wow. So again, like, I'm really interested to hear these stories, and, you've probably got enough content to do you a number of years, and excited. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I hope, you talked about, I come across as positive, and I'm glad, because some of what I'm saying, like in the book, is like, well, here's a bad thing that happened, but my goal with explaining the bad thing that happened is what's the moral, and I have a moral at the end of each of the 31 chapters, which says, here's how to avoid that, or here's what I should have done differently, But one of the reviewers of the book, and the publisher found great reviewers, and they said very, genuinely nice things. They said it was a little bit too U.S. focused. Obviously some of them were non-U.S. people, and that was a fair comment. But one of them said, well, I was thinking about doing a startup, and now I've read your book, and now I know I'm not going to. And I thought, oh no, that's not what I wanted. But he went on and he said, look, it's not a strike against the book, but I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And it's not for me, but the book is good. The content is not negative. But it will be very enlightening to people that are on the fence and they're thinking, I kind of want to, but I'm not sure. And so I hope it's more of the, hey, this is going to help me not make mistakes.
Yeah.
That's what I hope.
Yeah, and I'm getting getting this on Amazon after this. I'm getting it done, and I mean, I'm excited. So, Jothy, again, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for
Well,
sharing your
thank you.
experiences, and thanks for reaching out. And again, I think this is actually going to be one of my favorite episodes of the second season. And again, we're always looking to increase our content and get bigger names and big fish from the industry. And you've actually ticked like 3 of my boxes. Obviously, startup founder, cyber related, and the personal stories to me is stuff that I love when I watch YouTube. So again, hopefully everybody enjoys this. And again, anybody watching this, show Jothy some love online, and read the book, watch the TED Talk, podcast, everything that comes with it. You're a very busy person, Jothy, and I'm wondering, like your grandchildren are going to be like, Grandpa, come on, we spend some time with us. So, never mind your children. Your children have probably accepted it. They're just like, Dad, it's fine. Do what you need to do. Yeah.
They're spread all over the country. Unfortunately, I have 5 grandchildren. They're all boys, and everybody's done having kids. So it's it, 5 boys.
Yeah.
But 4 of them are on the West Coast in California, and 1 in Massachusetts, not far from where we are. So we get to see 1 frequently, but the others are, a plane flight away, and that's like twice a year. That's about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure at one time when you start to relax in your life, you'll get to see them more frequently. You're actually going to be like the equivalent of Iron Man on our YouTube series. It's like, that's how I'll always remember you, as like Iron Man, the Tony Stark, the inventor. And that's how I'll probably brand this, as cybersecurity's version of Iron Man. There we go. If you're happy with that, then it's getting posted.
Okay. And I want to tell you that you have increased the odds, you personally have increased the odds that we come to Scotland, because I need an expert, and I need an expert at Scotch whiskey to show me around.
Listen, we are being serious for our audience. They're like, oh, they've made this up, they've stitched this up. I'm like, if you come to Scotland, I will make sure you have the best time of your life, and there'll be copious amounts of whiskey drunk, and because there's all sorts of tours and stuff we could do, and I'm being genuinely serious, and that's me thanking you for spending your time, giving your insights, and giving me an opportunity here to interview you. So, yeah.
There's a whole bunch of single malt scotches that I love. That I don't like the peaty stuff.
Same. Yeah. Lefroy is quite heavy.
Yeah. So the Balvenie and Glenlivet, and there's like a half a dozen that I really like a lot. And there's probably some that are too small to export. So I probably don't even know of them.
There's so many variations, and because of the different islands or the different aspects of Scotland, because they have different water, different casks, there's different processes, different grains. So, there's a huge education piece, which is great. And as I mentioned before, the Johnny Walker facility is amazing. There's actually one in Edinburgh, right? You're going to laugh at this. It's like, it's called the Whiskey Exchange, I think. And you do a tour. You're in like a small, it's not like a theme park ride, but you're like in this small cart. It takes you around different things. Then you go into this whole interactive and you make your own whiskey. You try multiple different ones. They give you something to cleanse a palate, like oat cakes. I think there's cheese, there's chocolate, many different things that you wouldn't think go well with whiskey, but they actually do. And there's a whole interactive Scottishness. The Americans love it. Sorry to brand you with that, but the tourists absolutely lap it up. And it's really good experience. And the castle was incredible. And then you've got day trips you can do as well. So, yeah,
Cool.
Obviously, if you're not doing any international travel, this could be something we look at in 2026, providing the world's still here.
Yeah.
Donald Trump hasn't killed us, or the aliens haven't taken over. So, yeah, we can see what happens either this year or next year. But
sure.
Yeah. Again, Jothy, thank you so much for your time.
All right. Well, great. I had so much fun. I appreciate you hosting me on here. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks again.